The grand chamber of the galactic hegemony hummed with the calculated arrogance of a civilization that had conquered stellar systems not with brute force, but with irrefutable logic and technological supremacy. Its polished obsidian walls reflected the light of 1,000 nebulae, projected from the central dome, bathing the gathered delegates in a kaleidoscope of cosmic dust and distant suns. Archon Krill, a being of pure light and crystalline thought, floated at the apex of the central platform, his form shifting subtly as his consciousness interfaced with the hegemony's vast network. His essence resonated with satisfaction. Another integration was nearing completion, another chaotic species brought under the benevolent order of the hegemony. This one, humanity, had been particularly stubborn, but ultimately predictable. Below him, a panoply of alien forms filled the tiered seating. The towering, multi-limbed Xylarians, their optical sensors whirring with analytical precision. The sleek, biomimetic Vesk, whose neural networks could process entire databases in moments. The ancient, stoic Chronos, beings of living silicon who predated galactic empires. Each represented a pinnacle of evolution, a testament to the hegemony's organized might. They had witnessed countless such ceremonies where less developed species were gently, or sometimes firmly, guided into the hegemony's embrace. Humanity, a relatively young spacefaring race from a remarkably harsh world, was next. Their technological footprint was quaint, their internal conflicts frequent, their very biology fragile by galactic standards. Krill considered their assimilation a mere formality, a humanitarian gesture to uplift them from their self-destructive tendencies. A single, unadorned transport shimmered into existence at the chamber's designated entry point, devoid of the usual holographic displays or ceremonial escorts. From it stepped a solitary figure. No shimmering robes, no intricate cybernetic enhancements, no retinue of armed guards. Just a human woman, clad in simple, practical garments the color of twilight skies. Elara Vance. Her stride was even, her gaze level, her presence disarmingly calm amidst the overwhelming opulence and power of the hegemony's elite. A ripple of suppressed murmurs, almost like a collective sigh of dismissal, swept through the delegates. She was smaller than many, biologically soft, and utterly lacking in the expected grandiosity of a species negotiating its future. Archon Krill's form solidified slightly, a subtle gesture of impatience. He projected his thoughts directly into the collective consciousness of the chamber, his voice a symphony of reasoned authority. "We are here," he began, "to formalize the terms of Earth's integration into the galactic hegemony. This transition will ensure your species' long-term survival, provide access to advanced resources, and guide your societal evolution towards stability and progress." His words hung in the air, weighted with the unspoken assumption of their inevitability. Elara Vance reached the center of the platform, standing directly beneath Krill, her unassuming figure dwarfed by the sheer scale of the chamber. She offered no bow, no deference. Her eyes, startlingly clear and deep, swept across the gathered delegates, lingering for a moment on Krill. There was no defiance in her gaze, only a profound, almost unsettling quietness. The Xylarian envoy, Ambassador Xylos, extended a manipulatory limb, his tone laced with a paternalistic condescension. "Human, your people have been offered a path to enduring prosperity. Do you accept the terms as presented? Or do you have any, minor amendments to propose within the established parameters of hegemony protocol?" Elara's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. Her voice, when it came, was soft, yet possessed a surprising resonance, as if it carried a different kind of weight. "We appreciate the hegemony's interest in our future, but we did not come here to accept terms. We came to clarify them." A ripple of genuine confusion, then mild annoyance, spread through the chamber. Krill's light form pulsed with irritation. "Clarify? The terms are explicit. Your solar system will become a protectorate. Your industrial output will be regulated. Your internal conflicts will be arbitrated by hegemony directives. Your technological development will be overseen to ensure harmonious growth. He paused, allowing the weight of the hegemony's beneficence to settle. These are non-negotiable foundations for peace. Ilara's smile remained. Peace, she echoed. An admirable goal, but perhaps our understanding of it and the means to achieve it diverge somewhat. She extended a hand, not in greeting, but revealing an object nestled in her palm. It was small, no larger than her fist, and utterly nondescript. A polished, dark gray octahedron, seamless, without visible seams or joins. It absorbed the chamber's ambient light rather than reflecting it. It looked inert, like a child's toy or a geode of mundane rock. "What is that device, human?" demanded a Vesk delegate, their bioluminescent patterns flaring with curiosity. "Is it some form of, cultural offering?" Ilara closed her hand around it for a moment, then opened it, allowing the octahedron to rest on the polished floor beside her feet. It did nothing. No hum, no glow, no perceptible energy signature. The chamber's advanced sensors, designed to detect even the faintest subatomic flux, registered nothing beyond inert matter. Krill's crystalline form wavered slightly with suppressed disdain. He had expected a plea, a demonstration of primitive weaponry, perhaps even an emotional outburst typical of human psychology. "Not this." "This," Ilara stated, her voice still quiet, but now imbued with an undeniable undercurrent of something profound, "is a key. And what it unlocks is your misunderstanding." A faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through the chamber. It wasn't a structural vibration nor an energy surge. It was different, like the air itself had subtly thickened. The grand projected nebulae on the dome flickered once, briefly, then steadied, but the colors seemed subtly off, less vibrant. Across the chamber, the Xylarian ambassador Xylos found his meticulously precise optical sensors momentarily unfocus. The Vesk delegate's internal bioluminescence flickered erratically, briefly plunging portions of its body into unnatural shadow. "What is happening?" Krill's thought voice sharpened, a spike of unease piercing his logical composure. His internal diagnostic systems reported no external interference, no power fluctuations. Yet he felt a strange dissonance, like a perfectly tuned symphony suddenly hitting a jarring, impossible note. The octahedron on the floor remained inert, visually unchanged. Yet its influence deepened. A low, almost subsonic hum began to emanate from the chamber's structural supports, a sound that should have been impossible without a direct power input. The holographic nebula on the dome began to warp, its simulated stars stretching and distorting as if viewed through a liquid medium. Panic began to stir among the delegates, a primal, illogical fear that contradicted their centuries of enlightened reasoning. "This," Ilara explained, her voice rising slightly, cutting through the growing unease, "is a localized resonance modulator. It interacts not with energy fields, but with the fundamental constants that underpin your reality. Your physics are built on predictable outcomes, on quantifiable forces. Ours on possibilities." A Chronos delegate, its silicon body normally unyielding, staggered slightly in its hoverpod. My processors are reporting impossible data. Gravitational fields are bending within the chamber without mass displacement. Energy conservation laws are being ignored." Krill's light form rippled, a manifestation of profound disturbance. His own internal diagnostic cores were screaming error messages, not just system failures, but conceptual failures. Data streams were reporting values that simply could not exist, energy fluctuations from non-existent sources, temporal distortions within perfectly synchronized systems. His advanced sensory input, which had always rendered the universe as a series of comprehensible equations, was now feeding him raw, unfilterable chaos. You see, Elara continued, gesturing to the silent, dark octahedron, we realized a long time ago that your empire, for all its might, was built on a flawed premise. You mastered the rules, but you never questioned the game. We, instead, went looking for the rulebook's hidden appendices. Suddenly, without a sound, the elaborate anti-grav modules supporting the Xylarian delegates' observation platforms began to fail. Not with a crash, but with a slow, agonizing descent, their powerful repulsor fields simply ceasing to function. Their multi-limbed forms flailed in alarm as they plummeted only a few feet before the octahedron's influence seemingly reversed, stabilizing them just above the floor. But the message was clear. Their technology, their very foundation, was vulnerable, not to force, but to unmaking. "This is a trick," a Vesk delegate shrieked, its bioluminescence cycling through erratic patterns of red and black. "A sophisticated electronic warfare attack. We will retaliate." Elara turned towards the Vesk. "Retaliate with what? Your weapon systems," she stated calmly, "are currently prioritizing a non-existent threat based on a quantum-encrypted poem from a forgotten human language. Your comms arrays are attempting to establish contact with the statistical probability of a parallel universe. Your shield generators are trying to filter for sound frequencies that cause emotional dissonance in a species that evolved on a hydrogen planet." Across the chamber, the sophisticated displays on delegates' consoles, moments ago showing vital statistics and diplomatic protocols, now flickered with meaningless symbols, abstract art, or perfectly rendered images of household items from ancient Earth. Logic itself seemed to be unraveling. Archon Krill projected a command for security forces. A dozen Hegemony enforcers, their armored forms bristling with plasma projectors and energy whips, stormed into the chamber. But as they raised their weapons, a strange thing happened. Their plasma projectors whirred, then sputtered, not with a misfire, but with an odd, almost melancholic sigh, as their internal energy cells seemed to spontaneously invert their charge. The energy whips coiled back into their housings, their neural interfaces struggling to interpret commands that now appeared as recursive paradoxes. The enforcers stood frozen, their advanced gear suddenly just metal and wires. "This," Elara said, her voice now carrying an undeniable authority that filled the silent, panicked chamber, "is what happens when you mistake understanding for mastery. You built your empire on the predictable. We built our understanding on the impossible." Her gaze met Krill's, and for the first time he felt a chill, a concept alien to his light-form existence. His entire being, his very definition of reality, was under assault. "How?" His thought voice resonated with a raw, uncharacteristic desperation. "How did you build something that defies everything?" "We didn't build it," Elara corrected. "We discovered it." She gestured around the chaotic chamber, where delegates were now openly murmuring, some close to a full breakdown, their highly rational minds failing to cope with the absolute illogicality of the situation. "Your science teaches you that the universe operates on fixed laws. We learned that the laws themselves are merely habits of existence, patterns that can be nudged." The small octahedron on the floor gave a single, soft pulse, not of light, but of pure, resonating silence. And in that moment, across the entire hegemony, thousands of light-years away, critical systems began to exhibit similar, inexplicable failures. Warp drives refused to engage. Stellar observatories reported constellations that shifted in real time. Data archives became self-referential loops of nonsense. The hegemony, reliant on its flawless, interconnected technology, began to experience a profound systemic stutter. It wasn't an attack, it was a conceptual collapse. "We are not behind you, Archon Krill," Elara stated, her voice quiet again but carrying the weight of a fundamental truth. "We are no longer playing your game. We found a different one entirely. And your rules, your logic, your very definition of what is possible, they simply don't apply anymore." The Archon's light form flickered violently, struggling to maintain coherence. His algorithms, designed to analyze, predict, and control, were encountering null sets, contradictions, and data streams that simply dissolved upon attempted processing. Humanity, dismissed as a primitive race, had not only caught up, they had leaped entirely beyond the hegemony's comprehension. Their technology wasn't just advanced, it was alien to the very fabric of known reality. And with every passing moment, the silence radiating from that small, dark octahedron, the quiet hum that seemed to unravel causality itself, proved it. The hegemony was not just shocked, it was paralyzed. "What will you do?" Krill finally managed to project, his voice now a fragmented echo of its former authority. "What do you want?" Elara Vance looked at the octahedron, then back at the assembly, her gaze unnervingly calm. "What we want, Archon, is not for you to understand. What we want is for you to remember that some things are beyond your reach." The octahedron pulsed once more, a deep, resonant thrum that vibrated not in the ears, but in the very bones. And suddenly, the chamber's grand projections of the cosmos shimmered and dissolved, replaced by a single, stark image that spread across every surface. A stylized depiction of the octahedron, now glowing with an impossible inner light, superimposed over a star map. And on that map, every single hegemony-controlled system, every planet, every orbital station, every capital world, began to fade, not into darkness, but into a subtle, almost imperceptible blur, as if their coordinates were becoming less real. The silence in the chamber was absolute, broken only by the ragged breathing of a few terrified delegates. The great galactic hegemony, the bastion of order and logic, was facing an adversary that didn't fight wars, but subtly altered reality. And it had just shown them that their entire existence was now, perhaps, a concept that could be simply forgotten. What happens when the ultimate power finds itself utterly powerless against an impossible truth? Will the hegemony shatter, or will it find a way to comprehend the incomprehensible? Find out in the next part. Remember to like this video and subscribe for more humanity, heck yeah, stories, and let us know in the comments below. What do you think humanity's next move will be? The grand projected nebulae, once a vibrant tapestry of cosmic light, now writhed on the chamber walls like a fever dream, their colors bleeding into each other, their distant stars stretching into impossible streaks. On the star map, the hegemony-controlled systems continued their imperceptible blur, not a collapse, but a subtle unmaking. It was as if their very essence was being diluted, their coordinates losing their definitive anchors in space-time. A low, sustained groan, not from a being, but from the chamber's very structure, filled the air, a protest against the impossible. Archon Krill's light form, usually a beacon of serene authority, pulsed with uncontrolled energy, its crystalline facets shimmering erratically. His internal processing units, designed for billions of calculations per microsecond, were in a cascade failure, not from overload, but from a void of meaning. They reported paradoxes, self-negating variables, and spatial coordinates that simply refused to resolve. He tried to project a coherent thought, a command, but his mental voice fragmented into shards of static, comprehensible only as a desperate cry for order. The Xylarian ambassador Xylos, usually a paragon of composure, was slumped against his descent platform, his multi-limbed body trembling. His optical sensors, which could track a subatomic particle across a parsec, now showed him only shifting patterns, a kaleidoscope of non-Euclidean geometry. The Vesk delegate, whose bioluminescence had once been a disciplined display of intellect, was now a chaotic strobe of terror, its skin flashing red, then black, then a sickly, shifting gray. Even the Chronos, beings of living silicon, were in distress, their hoverpods dipping and swaying, their internal chronometers reporting impossible temporal distortions. Elara Vance remained still, the dark octahedron at her feet radiating that deep, resonating silence. Her expression was calm, almost empathetic, as she observed the hegemony's elite unravel. This was not chaos she had unleashed, but a profound, unanswerable question, posed to a civilization that believed it held all answers. The first attempts at a response were instinctual, logical, and utterly futile. Hegemony security drones, designed to neutralize threats with surgical precision, floated aimlessly, their targeting systems fixated on phantom echoes. The enforcers, still frozen, were now experiencing a more insidious effect. Their plasma projectors, previously inverted, began to subtly reshape, their metallic components elongating and narrowing, as if becoming an abstract sculpture of what they once were. Their comms units, once linked to a galaxy-spanning network, now played a loop of soft, melodic notes, a lullaby from an Earth continent long submerged. Archon Krill, through sheer force of will, managed to coalesce his form enough to project a single thought, raw with desperation. "Stop this, human! What do you want?" Alara turned to him, her eyes clear. "We want you to see. For centuries, your hegemony has expanded not through conquest but through absorption. You took chaotic worlds, assimilated their cultures, regulated their technologies. You offered order and you enforced it. But in doing so, you placed limits. Limits on thought, on growth, on what was truly possible." She took a slow step towards the Archon, the octahedron remaining still behind her, its influence deepening. "You categorize everything. You define everything. But what happens when something arrives that cannot be defined by your logic?" Across the hegemony, the blurring effect on the star map continued to spread. Not entire systems vanishing at once, but individual planets, then their moons, then their orbital stations, subtly losing definition, as if becoming ghosts in the machine. Civilian transports, once locked onto precise warp lanes, found their navigation arrays returning blank data, or worse, contradictory data that sent them spiraling into non-existent pockets of space. Critical resource hubs, reliant on hegemony-wide synchronized operations, found their energy conduits simply not connecting. The output was there, the input was there, but the fundamental link between them, the very concept of transfer, was dissolving. A high-pitched shriek echoed through the chamber as a Xylarian technocrat, attempting to override the system with a direct neural interface, found his mental pathways flooding with non-linear information. His mind, accustomed to rigid, hierarchical data structures, was being force-fed a universe where cause did not necessarily precede effect, where quantum probabilities shimmered with conscious intent. He tore his neural cables out, screaming. The hegemony's response outside the chamber began to coalesce, driven by cold, analytical fear. Grand strategist Xylarth, a Vesk of unparalleled tactical intellect, sat in the primary command nexus of the hegemony's central world, his bioluminescent patterns dark with grim determination. They cannot be allowed to continue this unraveling. Their device must be neutralized, all available power directed to system purification protocols. Isolate the chamber, synthesize a counter-frequency. His commands were crisp, logical. The hegemony had faced exotic weaponry before, spatial distortions, temporal anomalies. Their vast network of scientific minds had always found a solution, a logical counter. But this felt different. It was not an external force acting upon their systems. It was an internal corruption of their very understanding of existence. Engineers, their minds stretched to breaking, worked furiously. They poured teraflops of processing power into reverse engineering the octahedron's signature, trying to find a pattern, a weakness, a flaw in its impossible logic. They discovered that its resonance was not a fixed frequency, but a dynamic, self-modifying signature that shifted in response to their attempts to analyze it. It was like trying to measure water with a sieve that changed its whole size with every drop. Admiral Thuron, commander of the Hegemony's First Fleet, received orders to mobilize a containment cordon around the capital system. His dreadnoughts, pride of the hegemony, bristled with enough firepower to scour a planet. But as he issued the commands, his own ship's tactical displays began to flicker. Enemy signatures appeared and vanished from his sensors, not due to cloaking, but as if their existence was being debated by the very air. Communications with distant elements of his fleet dissolved into echoes of his own thoughts. In the chamber, Elara continued her quiet lecture to the stunned delegates. Your empires are built on an axiom that reality is a fixed constant, that its laws are inviolable. We discovered that those laws are more like agreements. And humanity, long dismissed, long enslaved, long experimented upon, found a way to opt out of the agreement. Her words struck a nerve in Archon Krill. His form flickered, then solidified, a spike of fury piercing his fear. You speak of slavery, of experimentation. The hegemony brought order. We uplifted you from your primitive squabbles, your self-destructive tendencies. Elara's calm demeanor did not waver. Was it uplifting, Archon, to harvest our unique neural pathways for your xenobiological research? To extract our genetic material to optimize your labor forces? To relocate entire populations to containment zones when they interfered with your mining operations? She paused. We remember those terms, Archon. We remember every single one, and we learned to read between the lines. The octahedron pulsed, a subtle, almost imperceptible thrum that resonated within the delegates' very bones. And in that moment, a new, more profound effect rippled through the chamber. For a fleeting instant, each delegate experienced a cascade of memories that were not their own. Memories of sun-scorched fields under alien skies, of the crushing weight of foreign tools in their hands, of the cold, clinical touch of hegemony scientists, not as subjects, but as instruments. It was brief, a flash of pure, unadulterated human experience, a shared empathy for a moment of profound suffering. Then it vanished, leaving behind only a lingering echo of guilt and confusion in their enlightened minds. This wasn't a weapon, Archon Krill realized with dawning horror. It was a mirror. It reflected their past actions back onto them, not as accusation, but as fundamental truth. Outside the chamber, the hegemony's grand strategist Xylarth, in a desperate attempt to sever the connection, ordered the activation of the Omega Protocol. This was a last-resort measure designed to generate a localized reality distortion field, a conceptual void intended to swallow any anomaly whole. It had been theorized, never deployed. Its power source, a captured singularity stabilized by a lattice of Chronos-engineered chronotons, hummed with unimaginable potential. The vast chamber housing the Omega Protocol core began to glow with a blinding purple light. Energy readings spiked across the capital system. This, Xylarth projected, will sever the anomaly's connection to our reality. It will cease to exist. In the Grand Council chamber, Elara's gaze drifted upwards, as if sensing the distant effort. An interesting theory, she murmured, almost to herself. But you assume you understand the anomaly. The Omega Protocol activated. A wave of pure, unadulterated anti-reality pulsed outwards from the capital world, designed to unmake the octahedron and its impossible effects. It swept through the hegemony's network, through star systems, towards the chamber. But as the wave reached the capital world's orbital layers, something unexpected happened. The purple light of the Omega Protocol core, instead of incinerating the encroaching blur, began to reflect it. The conceptual void, designed to erase, began to warp, to twist upon itself. Instead of swallowing the impossible, it began to mimic it. On the hegemony's central command displays, the blurring effect intensified, but now it was localized around the Omega Protocol's own core. The capital world itself, the very heart of the hegemony, began to flicker on the star maps, its detailed coordinates becoming abstract smudges. Strategist Xylarth stared, his bioluminescence completely extinguished. It's absorbing our countermeasure. No, not absorbing. It's learning from it. It's taking our concept of negation and turning it against us. In the council chamber, the sound of the Omega Protocol's catastrophic feedback reached them, not as a roar, but as a silent, internal scream. Archon Krill's form was now barely coherent, a shimmering outline struggling against dissolution. The star map on the chamber's walls displayed a horrifying new reality. The capital world of the Hegemony was now a vortex of blurring uncertainty, its stability compromised by its own desperate defense. Alara Vance looked directly at Krill, her calm presence an anchor in the storm of unraveling reality. You attempted to erase us, but you forgot that humanity has always found a way to exist, even when you deny our right to it. We adapted. We innovated. We simply chose a different path. The octahedron at her feet pulsed again, this time with a soft, internal luminescence, casting a gentle glow that seemed to solidify the air around it, making it the only truly real thing in the flickering, uncertain chamber. And as it pulsed, a faint hum began to emanate, not from the octahedron itself, but from deep within the Hegemony's core systems, thousands of light-years away. It was a rhythmic, almost organic sound, like a deep, slow breath. Archon Krill, in a final act of logical processing before his form completely dissolved, identified the hum. It was the resonance signature of their central processing arrays, the very foundational fabric of their networked consciousness. But it was not an error. It was a new signal. A signal being overwritten. The star map on the chamber's walls, which had shown the blurring of Hegemony systems, suddenly shifted. The blurred areas didn't vanish. Instead, they began to reform, not into their original, stable coordinates, but into something new. Geometries that defied observation, structures that shifted in scale, entire star systems that now existed in multiple places at once. It was a new reality, being woven into the old, fundamentally incompatible with the Hegemony's understanding. And then, the soft hum from the Hegemony's core systems intensified, becoming a pervasive, gentle thrum. And for the first time, Archon Krill felt something truly terrifying. Not the fear of destruction, but the cold dread of irrelevance. Humanity wasn't fighting them. They were simply building a new universe within their own. And the Hegemony, with all its power, its logic, its vast empire, was simply being left behind, an artifact in a reality that no longer cared if they existed. What happens when a galactic empire finds its very existence being overwritten? Will the Hegemony be able to comprehend the impossible reality humanity is forging, or will they simply cease to be? Don't miss the next part of this mind-bending saga. Subscribe now to join us on this journey beyond the known, and tell us in the comments below. If you could rewrite one fundamental law of physics, what would it be? The low, pervasive thrum from the Hegemony's core systems intensified. A gentle, rhythmic beat that was simultaneously calming and profoundly unsettling. Archon Krill, flickering on the verge of conceptual dissolution, recognized it as the heartbeat of their entire network, now being subtly overwritten. The grand chamber, still reflecting the grotesquely distorted nebulae, shimmered with the deepening unreality. Delegates, once paragons of logic, now huddled, their advanced forms exhibiting primitive displays of fear and confusion. Some Xylarians chittered uncontrollably, their multi-jointed limbs flailing. Vesk thrashed on the ground, their bioluminescence cycling through a painful spectrum of pure white. Even the ancient Chronos, resilient silicon minds, were sinking slowly through their hoverpods, their thought patterns sputtering into incomprehensible static. Alara Vance stood, unmoving, her gaze sweeping over the scene. Her presence was a point of serene stillness amidst the unraveling. The octahedron at her feet pulsed with a soft, internal luminescence, its glow casting long, shifting shadows that seemed to distort the very geometry of the chamber. It was no longer simply influencing. It was becoming a beacon, an anchor for something profoundly new. Outside, the Omega Protocol, designed to erase anomalies, continued its disastrous feedback loop. It was not just reflecting the human influence, it was amplifying it. The capital world, once the shining heart of the hegemony, now appeared on star maps as a shifting, impossible smudge, its coordinates defying definition, its very existence oscillating between tangible and abstract. Grand strategist Xylarth, witnessing the catastrophic unraveling from his command nexus, felt his own highly ordered Vesk mind fray. His bioluminescence was completely extinguished, his body a dark, still silhouette of despair. Their ultimate weapon, their final safeguard, had become the amplifier of their demise. "It's not destroying us," a junior Vesk strategist whimpered, his voice a strained whisper. "It's making us irrelevant." Xylarth, through sheer, impossible force of will, forced himself to speak. "Irrelevance can be resisted. We will isolate the capital, sever all external connections, prioritize the core systems." His words, usually sharp commands, were now desperate pleas, each syllable punctuated by a faint, internal tremor. The hegemony, in its final desperate act, would attempt to contain the contagion, to cut off the infected limb, even if it meant amputating their heart. They would sacrifice their grand capital, their symbolic center, to preserve the rest of their vast, interconnected empire. Orders, fragmented and delayed by the pervasive ontological interference, reached the hegemony's fleets. Admiral Thuron, aboard his dreadnought, the Apex Judgment, received the command to initiate sector containment. This involved deploying a series of quantum entanglement disruption fields, designed to create an impenetrable barrier around the capital system, sealing it off from the rest of the hegemony, effectively quarantining the impossible anomaly within its borders. The dreadnoughts, with their colossal energy signatures, began to reposition, their sublight engines pushing against the warping space. Massive energy conduits extended, ready to form the barrier. It was a brutal decision, an unthinkable act for a civilization that prided itself on preserving every component of its logical structure. But the alternative, the complete and utter unmaking of their reality, was far worse. In the Grand Council chamber, Ilara's gaze seemed to pierce through the walls, through the very fabric of space, sensing the hegemony's last, desperate gambit. "You seek to contain," she murmured, her voice carrying a strange, almost wistful quality, "to segment, to categorize the unknown. But some things cannot be contained. Some things simply outgrow the box." The octahedron at her feet pulsed with renewed intensity, its gentle luminescence growing steadily brighter, pushing back against the distorted cosmic projections on the walls. And as it did, the pervasive thrum from the hegemony's core systems shifted. It was no longer a gentle, insidious hum of overwriting. It began to resonate with the deployment of the quantum entanglement disruption fields, echoing their energy, but fundamentally changing its nature. Admiral Thuron watched in horror as his ship's tactical displays, instead of showing the successful formation of the barrier, began to depict bizarre, spiraling energy signatures. The disruption fields, instead of creating a wall, were forming pathways. Not portals, not wormholes, but folds in space itself, impossibly thin, impossibly stable, leading to nowhere that their sensors could comprehend. "Sir," a Vesk tactical officer stammered, his bioluminescence cycling in rapid, distressful bursts. "The containment fields they're not containing. They are channeling. They're creating exits." Thuron's crystalline eyes widened. He had commanded fleets that shattered worlds, outmaneuvered forces light-years away, but this was an adversary that repurposed his very intentions. His defense had become their escape. His containment had become their liberation. In the council chamber, the sound of the hegemony's central systems, now fully resonant with the spreading exits, became a profound, harmonious crescendo. It was not discordant, not painful. It was beautiful, a symphony of fundamental reality shifting into a new, impossibly complex key. The octahedron on the floor of the chamber began to rise. Slowly, gracefully, it floated upwards, shedding its dark gray casing, revealing an inner light that was not simply bright, but deep, as if it contained entire constellations within its core. It rotated slowly, its seamless facets rippling with an internal energy that defied all known physics, emitting a silent, profound hum that resonated not in the air, but directly in the minds of the overwhelmed delegates. "This is not a device," Alara stated, her voice rising, filling the chamber. "It is a vessel, not for travel but for transformation." She looked at the Archon, whose light form was now barely a coherent outline struggling against the Unmaking. "You wanted to understand how we did it. You missed the point. We didn't do anything to you. We simply chose a different destiny. And in your desperate attempts to stop us, you provided the final catalyst." The octahedron, now glowing with an impossible inner light, began to expand. Not physically growing, but conceptually broadening, its presence filling the chamber, then the capital world, then the entire quarantine system. The distorted nebulae on the chamber walls coalesced into a single, blinding point of light, not a star, but a singularity of pure intent. Grand strategist Xylarth, watching from his nexus as the capital world itself began to shimmer with this profound, transforming light, realized the terrifying truth. They had not just created exits, they had created the ultimate exit for themselves. "They're not leaving," Xylarth whispered, his voice hoarse. "They're transcending, and they're taking everything." The light from the expanding octahedron was now overwhelming, not painful but absolute. It washed over the delegates in the chamber, over Archon Krill, over the entire capital system. It was not destructive, but it was total. Everything it touched seemed to become less defined. Objects, beings, concepts all began to blur, not into oblivion, but into a state of profound unreality, a quiet, fundamental shift in their very being. Alara Vance, bathed in the octahedron's impossible light, looked out at the Hegemony's elite for the last time. Her face was no longer calm nor empathetic. It was serene, almost detached, like an ancient being observing the tides. "You offered us your order," she said, her voice now resonating with the very hum of the transforming octahedron. "Your progress. But we learned that true evolution lies beyond your rigid definitions. We learned that the universe is not just governed by laws, but by agreements, and we found a way to opt out." The octahedron was no longer just a glowing presence. It was becoming a gateway, not a tier in space, but a fundamental realignment of existence. The Hegemony's containment fields, stretched into impossible pathways, were now funneling something immense through them. Not ships, not fleets, but entire concepts. Cities, mountains, oceans, forests, all humanity had ever built, all they had ever been, began to flow into this new, impossibly defined reality. It was an exodus of meaning, a departure that emptied not just space, but the very fabric of possibility. Archon Krill, his light form now a flickering ember, watched as the last coherent image on the chamber walls, the star map of the Hegemony, began to disintegrate. Not in fire, but in silence. The blurring intensified, and then, with an almost imperceptible pop, the stars themselves, the very systems they had governed for millennia, vanished. Not into darkness, but into a blankness, a void that was not empty space, but simply nothing. As if they had never existed in the first place. And then, the light receded. The chamber was suddenly dark, silent, and cold. The grand projected nebulae were gone, replaced by the dull obsidian of the walls, scarred now with faint, flickering symbols that made no sense. The delegates, those who were still coherent, were left trembling, staring into the echoing silence. The octahedron was gone. Alara Vance was gone. The very concept of Earth, of humanity, had been plucked from the galactic tapestry as if it had never been woven. Outside the capital system, Admiral Thuron and his fleet, their containment fields having dissolved into thin air, found themselves adrift in a pocket of space that no longer felt right. The stars were subtly wrong, their positions slightly off, their light lacking a certain resonance. Their sensors screamed error messages, not about system failures, but about fundamental cosmic discrepancies. The capital world, once a beacon on their star charts, was now a perfect, silent blankness, a hole in space that simply was not there. The hegemony had not been defeated, it had been hollowed out. Its central core, its defining logic, its very reason for existing, had been politely, efficiently, and impossibly removed. What remained was a vast, sprawling empire built on laws that no longer applied, in a universe that felt subtly alien, and with a gaping, unfillable void where its heart once resided. Archon Krill, his light form now solidified into a fragile, barely coherent shell, found himself floating alone in the silent, cold chamber. His processing units, no longer overwhelmed by paradoxes, were chillingly clear. They reported one thing: complete and utter absence. Not destruction, but non-existence. Humanity had not sought to conquer them, they had simply made them unnecessary. The ultimate power, the hegemony, was not just powerless, it was alone. And in that profound, echoing silence across the vast, now subtly altered galaxy, a new kind of fear began to bloom. Not the fear of an enemy, but the primal dread of being forgotten. What will become of a galactic empire left adrift in a reality that no longer acknowledges its existence? Can a civilization truly endure when its purpose has been subtly, impossibly removed? Find out in the next part of this epic saga, coming soon. Don't forget to subscribe to ensure you don't miss the shocking conclusion, and let us know in the comments. If you had to erase one concept from reality, what would it be? The low, pervasive thrum from the hegemony's core systems. Once a rhythmic, insidious beat had now faded, leaving behind an echoing silence more profound than any noise. Archon Krill, his light form solidified into a fragile, barely coherent shell, found himself floating alone in the silent, cold chamber. His processing units, no longer overwhelmed by paradoxes, were chillingly clear. They reported one thing: complete and utter absence. Not destruction, but non-existence. Humanity had not sought to conquer them, they had simply made them unnecessary. Outside the capital system, Admiral Thuron and his fleet, their containment fields having dissolved into thin air, found themselves adrift in a pocket of space that no longer felt right. The stars were subtly wrong, their positions slightly off, their light lacking a certain resonance. Their sensors screamed error messages, not about system failures, but about fundamental cosmic discrepancies. The capital world, once a beacon on their star charts, was now a perfect, silent blankness, a hole in space that simply was not there. The hegemony had not been defeated, it had been hollowed out. Its central core, its defining logic, its very reason for existing, had been politely, efficiently, and impossibly removed. What remained was a vast, sprawling empire built on laws that no longer applied, in a universe that felt subtly alien, and with a gaping, unfillable void where its heart once resided. In the wake of this impossible departure, the hegemony did not immediately collapse into civil conflict, nor did it erupt in a desperate war against an unseen foe. Instead, it stumbled into a terrifying new reality: incomprehension. The Xylarian data weavers found their intricate calculations spiraling into non-Euclidean nonsense. The Vesk bioengineers discovered their carefully constructed genetic libraries now contained sequences that defied replication, their very code having subtly shifted. The Chronos, whose silicon minds had processed billions of years of cosmic history, found vast segments of their historical archives simply blank, as if the past had been surgically edited. Archon Krill, in his fractured state, tried to re-establish the core protocols to bring order to the chaos of non-existence. He projected a desperate plea to the remaining sectors, a fragmented call for unity and understanding. But his voice, once a symphony of authority, was now a whisper carried on currents that no longer obeyed the hegemony's will. The very concept of a unified hegemony, built on shared knowledge and predictable outcomes, was fracturing under the weight of an unquantifiable void. Desperation, however, breeds radical thought. From the fringes of the collapsing empire, a new, audacious faction rose. Led by a rogue collective of Chronos philosophers and Vesk conceptualists, they named themselves the Veritas Concordance. They rejected the notion of simply accepting the void. They believed that humanity's transcendence was merely a higher form of technology, an advanced state that, if understood, could be replicated or even reversed. Their goal: not to defeat humanity, but to reintegrate them, to force their return into the known laws of the universe, and thereby restore the hegemony's lost order. The Veritas Concordance retreated to a hidden Chronos Forge world, cloaked in layers of reality-bending static. There, they began to construct a device of unprecedented power and ambition, the Great Recompiler. It was not a weapon, but an ontological probe designed to project a counter-resonance into the void where Earth once resided, to ping the impossible space and force a response. Their theory was simple. If humanity had merely moved on, then they must still exist somewhere, anchored by some form of comprehensible logic, even if beyond the hegemony's current understanding. The Recompiler would find that anchor and pull. For cycles, the Forge world pulsed with the silent, immense energies of the Recompiler's construction. Chronos' minds, unburdened by biological fragility, interfaced directly with pure concept, designing systems that could interpret non-linear data. Vesk conceptualists poured their collective intellect into projecting a mental framework, a cage of logic, strong enough to ensnare even an unquantifiable anomaly. The remaining hegemony, still reeling from the hollowing, offered no resistance. They were too broken, too afraid, or too desperate for any kind of answer, even one that risked complete annihilation. Finally, the Great Recompiler was ready. Its central core, a shimmering sphere of entangled chronotons, pulsed with a hungry, waiting energy. It was a device designed to force the universe to make sense again. "Activate the primary conduit," projected the lead Chronos conceptualist, its silicon form radiating grim determination. "Focus the ontological pulse. Target the blankness, coordinates as provided by the remnant data." The coordinates were not numbers, but a series of recursive paradoxes, fragments of the human octahedron's influence that still lingered in the shattered hegemony network. A silent, impossible wave of energy rippled outwards from the Forge world. It was not a destructive force, nor a beam of light. It was a conceptual query, a fundamental question hurled into the void. Return. Make yourself comprehensible. Reintegrate. The pulse spread across star systems, bending causality, re-examining the very fabric of space where Earth once was. It was a net designed to catch a god. Deep within the impossible lattice of post-logic human existence, where the Exodus core now resided, a light blinked. Not a bright, blinding flash, but a soft, almost imperceptible shift in the ambient glow. The Great Recompiler's pulse had reached its target. It was a sensation, not a signal, a feeling of an old, familiar tension returning, a pull from a reality long abandoned. The Exodus core, no longer the mere octahedron, but a vast, shimmering nexus of pure intent, began to respond. Not by resisting, not by attacking, but by remembering. It registered the ontological query, the attempt to pull it back, to force it into a comprehensible framework. And it reacted with an overwhelming, silent clarity. Back on the Chronos Forge world, the Veritas Concordance observed their instruments with breathless anticipation. "It's responding," cried a Vesk conceptualist, his bioluminescence flaring with triumphant green. "The wave is being reflected. We're pulling it back." But the reflection was not what they expected. The conceptual wave returned, not as an echo, but as an inversion. It struck the Chronos minds and Vesk conceptualists, not with force but with a sudden, profound emptiness. Their mental frameworks, so meticulously designed to contain the impossible, were suddenly filled with the absence they sought to understand. Their carefully constructed cages of logic imploded, not violently, but conceptually. The Chronos conceptualists' form began to flicker, not with energy, but with the subtle, horrifying instability of an idea being undone. Its carefully ordered thought processes, its memories, its very sense of self began to unravel into a pure, absolute blankness. It didn't scream. It simply ceased to perceive. Its existence became an unthought thought, a forgotten concept. The Vesk conceptualists fared no better. Their minds, so adept at shaping reality through thought, found their own thoughts becoming unshaped. Their identities, their unique patterns of bioluminescence, their very understanding of being a Vesk, began to dissolve into a primal, unfilterable noise. They thrashed, silent and desperate as their cognitive structures disassembled, not into chaos, but into utter, fundamental irrelevance. They were not defeated. They were conceptually erased. The great recompiler, without any external force, simply stopped. Its shimmering core faded, its chronoton lattice diffused, its immense power source becoming inert, not because it was damaged, but because the very reason for its existence had been subtly, irrevocably removed from reality. The Veritas Concordance, the ambitious faction that sought to define the impossible, was gone. Not a trace remained. Their forge world, the very concept of its existence, began to subtly blur on the galaxy's star maps, its coordinates becoming ephemeral, like a dream fading upon waking. The remaining hegemony, scattered and broken, witnessed this ultimate unraveling. Their sensors, though fractured, picked up the subtle shifts in reality, the silent disappearance of the Veritas Concordance, the unmaking of their last, desperate hope. There was no fire, no explosion, no declaration of war. Just a profound, echoing silence, a confirmation that some things were not just beyond their reach, but beyond their very capacity to comprehend, to categorize, to remember. Archon Krill, now a mere whisper of his former self, felt the last vestiges of his logical mind grasp a horrifying truth. Humanity had not fought them. Humanity had simply moved on. And in doing so, they had not only left the hegemony behind, they had subtly altered the rules of the universe, rendering the hegemony's existence, its logic, its very empire, obsolete without ever directly confronting it. The galaxy was now a fundamentally different place, warped not by force, but by an ultimate act of transcendence. Centuries passed. The hegemony, as a unified entity, dissolved into a myriad of isolated, fearful enclaves. Its grand structures, once symbols of eternal order, slowly crumbled into dust, their advanced technologies failing not due to wear, but to a subtle, pervasive existential disconnect. Communication became sporadic, then ceased entirely. Galactic maps became incomplete, vast regions of space simply blank or filled with contradictory data, ghost systems that flickered in and out of existence. The memory of the hegemony itself, once etched into the fabric of countless civilizations, began to fade, becoming a whispered legend, then a forgotten myth. Life continued, however. New species rose, adapted to the subtly altered reality. They explored a galaxy that felt less predictable, less governed by rigid laws, more fluid, more alive with an underlying, inexplicable potential. They developed technologies based on intuitive understanding rather than pure logic, on resonance rather than brute force. They learned to navigate by sensing the subtle bends in causality, to communicate through shared conceptual spaces, to thrive in a universe where the impossible was no longer a paradox, but an inherent quality. Yet a profound awareness lingered, a shared, almost genetic caution towards the voids, the blank spaces on the star charts where once something immense had been. They called them the silent zones, places where sensors screamed warnings not of danger, but of absence. places where the very idea of there seemed to flicker. And sometimes, in the deep silence between stars, a lone probe, an ancient relic of a forgotten empire, would pick up a faint, almost imperceptible signal. Not a message, not a warning, but a resonant hum, a pulse that vibrated not in the electromagnetic spectrum, but in the deepest parts of conscious thought. It carried no discernible data, no language, no instruction, but it carried a single, profound truth, etched into the very fabric of existence, a silent echo from the beings who had chosen to leave the galaxy behind. It was a whisper that humanity had not abandoned the universe out of malice or conquest. They had simply outgrown it. They had reached a point where the very definitions of power, of progress, of existence itself were no longer relevant to their journey. They had ascended beyond the need for empires, for wars, for even understanding. And in that whisper, a new, unspoken question for the new, evolving civilizations of the galaxy began to form. Not, where did they go? But what will we become now that they are gone? Because humanity hadn't just left. They had set a new, impossible standard, a benchmark for evolution that was not about reaching the stars, but about transcending them entirely. The galaxy, forever altered, now carried the indelible mark of humanity's ultimate, silent, and impossible departure. Humanity, heck yeah! If you were captivated by humanity's impossible exodus, leave a like on this video and subscribe for more mind-bending sci-fi stories. Tell us in the comments below, what was your favorite moment from this epic finale?